Did you write a business plan or financial projection?
Financial projections, yes. Business plan, in terms of the sort of supporting text that goes along with it, is something that I've learned to sort of generate after the fact. So I find that, you know, it's within the financial model that I think you have to ask yourself the tough questions. And really the key is in building that model, again, bottoms up. You don't want to look at a market like storage and say it's a $42 billion market, I can get 1% of that market, therefore X, Y, Z, right? I mean, that's a ridiculous way to try to approach things. It's really about the nuts and bolts and being scrappy and saying how many phone calls can I make, you know, if you have how many in-person visits can I make, how many people can I start to hire, and are they going to be as productive as I am in making these calls, and so on and so forth. And eventually coming up with numbers is, well, how much money do I need in order to actually get that thing off the ground? You know, from there rather, I would write a, you know, sort of one-page executive summary, right, of what the business is, what I'm looking for. And this is assuming I'm going to go out there and try to raise some money, right? So as I start talking to folks that might be potential investors, they start asking questions. I start basically answering those questions within this document. And if you were to look at what the written business plan for Scale was at the first investor meeting versus where it was by the time we got the money, it's a one-page document versus like a 26-page document. But you know, a mistake I think is to think I'm just going to sit down in sort of a closed room and produce this 26-page document, because you won't be answering the right questions along the way. The financial model, I think, is the most important piece in terms of understanding how your business is going to work. And then when you can start talking to other folks about that and they can understand, you know, basically what you do and how you're going to sell it, then the rest of the plan sort of just starts to, you know, it won't write itself, you do have to write it, but you know, what you're going to say is really important. And I think it's obvious as somebody who has read other people's business plans a lot. I've done a lot of consulting with startups, and you can always tell the plans that were written before they ever talk to any customers or investors, right? They're obviously written in a certain way, and they tend to be much longer than they need to be. They're answering questions nobody really cares about, you know, starting with customers, and then, you know, you have to think of investors as basically customers as well. So just like I said, I'm going to start calling customers before I even have a product to sell them. I start talking to investors before I have a company to sell them, basically, because that's what raising money is you're selling a part of your company to an investor. It's a sales pitch, and you need to sort of ask them up front, well, what kind of company are you going to be looking for? What kind of questions would you want me to answer if you did look at a company I had, and go from there.
Where did the investments for Scale come from?
So Scale, the first round of funding for Scale came as a combination of venture capital and also a grant that we got from the state of Indiana, what they call their 21st Century Fund. So that's a fund that they have here to entice companies like Scale to locate, relocate, grow within the state of Indiana. And you know, in addition, we supplemented that with traditional venture capital. You know, and I, as personal preference, prefer venture capital over angel investing, only because I find that it's really the number of investors you have is where the workload comes from, and having 10 people each investing $50,000 is a lot more work than one person investing $500,000. And so, you know, while I know that there are individual investors that are sort of behind the venture capitalists that have come in, even when I had folks come to me directly and say, hey, we're interested in getting in this round, I'd say, we have to go through one of these other investors. I don't want you basically in individually. And they did that, and I still talk to them, and I know that they're invested in Scale, but it's just easier to manage, I think. And it's nice to have the professional experience of a venture capitalist in the room. I mean, one of the benefits of true venture capital is that you're talking about guys that are going to be sitting in the boardroom with you that have seen whatever problems you have probably dozens of times before at other companies. And you can gain some of that through angel investors as well, but one of the benefits of the VC is that they're probably experiencing similar problems at other companies right now, right? So it's not something that, well, 10 years ago I had a company and X, Y, and Z happened. It's, oh, the economy stinks right now, these companies are having problems. If you're having sales problems, it's very relevant. They can, sometimes a venture capitalist can be distracted by problems at other companies. I mean, that could be a downside, but that's the route that we went.
What is the biggest challenge you faced at scale? And if you could go back, what would you do differently?
Well, I think it's too early in our life to say there's much that I would do differently. If you were to come ask me these questions 5 years from now, I'd probably have a laundry list. But so far everything looks all right. But the biggest challenge that we face is really twofold. On one hand, we are rapidly growing, and we're growing in an economy and with with capital markets that are very difficult right now. And so you have to balance aggressive growth as a startup. I mean, you're trying to grow as quickly as possible, especially when our competition are folks like Dell and Hewlett-Packard and EMC and extremely large, well-established companies. So you have to compete with them. The way you compete with them is growing and gaining momentum before they can stop you. On the flip side, there's no guarantee that when I need to go raise more money, I'm going to be able to do that, right? And so you have to sort of balance that. You always have to balance it, I think. Back in the dot-com days, I think the methodology was just step on the gas as hard as possible and hope everything falls into place. That's ridiculous, as is trying to grow rapidly with no money, right? I mean, that's impossible as well. And so I think that the challenge right now is that the reality is you can only step on the gas so much without getting into dangerous territory, and trying to raise money while growing and having enough growth to be able to raise that money is a balancing act that basically every entrepreneur has to do. But that's a pretty big challenge for us.